On the misty morning of March 15, 1889, the staff of the exclusive Belmont Hotel in Newport, Rhode Island, made a discovery that would haunt the city's elite for generations. Room 237 stood eerily silent. The silk curtains remained drawn. The twin champagne glasses from the prior night's intimate gathering sat untouched upon the marble table. And atop the antique escritoire, a half-finished letter, unsigned, its ink still fresh. The scent of imported French perfume lingered faintly in the air like a ghost. And the woman who had once captivated presidents and princes, Isabella Fairmont, was gone. She had vanished into the thick March fog without a trace. For 40 years, police would chase whispers, conjectures, and carefully buried secrets. But what they uncovered would shake the foundations of America's most powerful families and send 3 of them scrambling to pay handsomely, just to ensure the official records were sealed forever. Before we descend further into this tale of gilded glamour, betrayal, and vanishing footprints in the fog, I want to thank you, yes, you, for joining me once again here at Sleepy History Tales. Many of you have been quietly listening week after week, and I see you. Whether you're relaxing after a long day or drifting off to the sound of forgotten scandals, I'm grateful for your presence. But if you haven't yet pressed that subscribe button or left a comment, now is the perfect time. Go ahead, tell me what state or country you're listening from. Because believe it or not, Isabella's disappearance may reach far beyond the misty shores of Rhode Island. Now, to understand why Isabella Fairmont's sudden vanishing sent tremors through the highest echelons of society, we must first trace her steps not through alleyways or crime scenes, but through drawing rooms, garden parties, and marble halls. Let us begin as all good ghost stories do at the beginning. In the summer of 1881, Newport was a glittering playground for America's wealthiest families. This was the Gilded Age, when fortunes were measured in railroads, steel, and shipping fleets. Along Bellevue Avenue, palatial summer cottages towered like European chateaux, their ballrooms echoing with the clink of crystal and the murmur of gossip. And at the very center of this opulent whirlwind stood Isabella Fairmont. She was born Isabella Catherine Aldridge in 1859, a perfect storm of elegance and pedigree. Her father, Cornelius Aldridge, had amassed a fortune shipping goods along the eastern seaboard. Her mother traced her lineage back to the Massachusetts Bay Colony. The union of old colonial blood and new industrial wealth made Isabella a prized gem in Newport's social crown. Her beauty only amplified her power. Raven black hair, sapphire eyes that seemed to see everything, and a silhouette that made Parisian designers weak at the knees. In 1878, she married Theodore Fairmont, the quiet, deliberate heir to a Pennsylvania steel empire. Their estate, Rosecliff Manor, became the very symbol of American aristocracy. 70 rooms, imported Italian marble, and gardens tended by a team of 20. Each summer, Isabella's soirees drew senators, barons, and dukes to Newport's cliffs. Her parties were more than parties. They were stages where alliances were formed and fates decided. The local press adored her. The Newport Daily News ran a weekly feature called Mrs. Fairmont's Week, charting her wardrobe guests and charitable ventures. She personally curated Newport's first theater and handpicked the musicians for her exclusive concerts. Even President Chester Arthur had once dined at her table, murmuring his admiration over fine cognac. But beneath this sparkling surface, the tides were shifting. You see, high society runs not just on wealth or charm, but on perception. In Newport, a whisper could ruin a dynasty. A single scandal reel or invented could erase decades of carefully cultivated reputation. And in the summer of 1884, the whispers began. At first, they seemed harmless. Isabella had been seen dining alone with a young architect, Jonathan Pembroke. Handsome, charismatic, ambitious. He'd recently been hired to redesign several of Newport's grand homes. But in a town built on propriety, even appearances could prove deadly. Jonathan Pembroke was not just another architect chasing commissions. At barely 30, he had arrived in Newport cloaked in the kind of romantic mystery that made widowed duchesses sip their tea slower and society matrons fan themselves a little too quickly. He carried himself like a man who knew too much and said too little, an intoxicating combination in a world where everyone knew everyone and said far too much. His reputation preceded him. A Gothic revival masterpiece built for a Pittsburgh steel baron. The meticulous restoration of a colonial estate in Virginia. These were not the works of a man merely competent. They were the mark of an artist, a visionary. But it was not just Jonathan Pembroke's talent that turned heads in drawing rooms and behind lace curtains. It was something else, danger. He was tall with lean shoulders that suggested poetry rather than power. His dark hair, always just a little unkempt, seemed perpetually at war with gravity, and those green eyes, sharp, unblinking, and unforgiving, looked through people rather than at them. When Isabella Fairmont first saw Pembroke, it wasn't at a party or in a garden. It was during a meeting for the expansion of Trinity Church. She was reviewing elevation drawings. He walked in with a rolled-up blueprint in hand, and something unspoken passed between them across the mahogany table. Witnesses would later say it was like watching a thunderstorm and a forest fire recognize each other. What began as a cordial professional exchange, an architect and a patron, soon evolved into something else entirely. Something incandescent, something reckless. Pembroke started visiting Rosecliff Manor under the entirely legitimate pretense of reviewing renovation plans. But the discussions rarely stayed within the blueprints. He and Isabella would wander the garden paths for hours, vanishing between hedgerows of climbing roses. Other times they would retreat to her private study, the one room even the most senior house staff never dared enter uninvited. Though trained in discretion, the staff noticed the signs. They always do. The way Isabella's laughter sounded lighter when he was near. The frequent deliveries of sealed envelopes in Pembroke's unmistakable handwriting. The quiet hush that settled over the manor when he arrived. And through it all, Theodore Fairmont remained blissfully unaware. Preoccupied with the demands of his steel empire, Theodore regarded Pembroke as an excellent hire and commended Isabella's taste. He mistook her glow for social vitality, her distraction for exhaustion. Years later, that ignorance would eat at him like rust. But Newport was no place for secrets. Its social hierarchy may have been gilded, but it was also merciless. Like a glass chandelier, beautiful, fragile, and full of sharp edges. By mid-August 1884, the whispers had grown into hushed conversations behind fans and teacups. By September, there was no more pretense. Isabella Fairmont was having an affair, the evidence circumstantial. But in Newport, perception was reality. She had been seen entering Pembroke's temporary studio on Temp Street. They were spotted at the casino, heads bent close together, lost in conversation, too intimate for mere acquaintances. The final nail came from the most damning of all sources, a maid in service to Mrs. Cornelius Vanderbilt, who claimed to have witnessed a stolen embrace, Isabella and Pembroke, locked in a passionate moment among the orchids in the conservatory during a private dinner party. Once the machinery of Newport society had lifted Isabella high, now it turned against her with cold surgical precision. Invitations slowed, then stopped. Once warm conversations cooled to polite nods. Dances she had once opened were suddenly scheduled without her. And those who owed their social rise to her patronage now found new hostesses to orbit around. But if Isabella noticed, she did not care. Friends would later say she seemed enchanted. Not with magic, but with passion, the kind that makes the world blur at the edges. The kind that turns consequences into background noise. The kind that blinds even the most brilliant minds. She continued to see Pembroke boldly, openly, daring society to say something to her face. What might have been admired as courage in another age was now seen as arrogance. And so the final blow came not in whispers, but in ink. On the morning of October 12th, 1884, readers of the New York Herald opened their papers to find a devastating headline: Newport's Fallen Angel, penned by the elusive society columnist known only as Observer. The article offered a detailed, almost surgical account of Isabella's affair. No names were named, of course, but everyone knew. And once a scandal makes print, it becomes more than gossip. It becomes history. The article in the New York Herald was not gossip, it was a reckoning. Written with the kind of cruel precision that suggests a source far too close to the subject, it didn't merely whisper rumors, it carved them in stone. In merciless detail, the anonymous columnist laid bare the affair between Isabella Fairmont and Jonathan Pembroke. But what truly shook even the most scandal-hardened residents of Newport wasn't the affair, it was the implication that Isabella had been deceived and used, according to Observer. Pembroke was not simply a charming architect with a wandering eye. He was a man deeply in debt, his gambling habits whispered of across state lines, and he had left a trail of wealthy, disillusioned women behind him in cities from Pittsburgh to Richmond. Worse still, the article alleged that Isabella herself had financed Pembroke's spiraling lifestyle. Tens of thousands of dollars drawn from her private accounts had vanished. Even more damning, it suggested that items from the Fairmont art collection, including a few notable heirlooms, had been quietly sold off, not to refresh the estate, but to satisfy Pembroke's creditors. For Theodore Fairmont, it was not just betrayal. It was public humiliation. The man who prided himself on his discipline, his empire, his household had been blind. His staff had known. His peers had gossiped. Even his business associates had speculated. But he, the husband, had remained in the dark. The confrontation came the next evening on October 13th, inside the oak-paneled library at Rosecliff Manor. In later years, Theodore would recount the moment to a private investigator, though his voice reportedly trembled with the memory. He said Isabella denied it at first, flatly, calmly. But when he placed the bank records in front of her, the signatures, the dates, something in her eyes changed. She broke. Yes, she admitted to the affair. Yes, she had given Jonathan money. But it wasn't manipulation, she insisted. It was love, real love. The kind she said she had never known in her marriage. The kind that made the world feel alive again. Theodore's response was swift and cold. He ordered her to cease all contact with Pembroke, to return to Boston for the winter, to enter a carefully arranged period of rehabilitation, during which public appearances would be choreographed to gently reintegrate her into polite society. It was the kind of strategy only someone in Theodore's position could devise. 1 part punishment, 1 part damage control. But Isabella refused. Utterly, she said the words that no woman of her station was ever supposed to say. Not aloud, not to her husband, and certainly not in that library. I love him. This marriage was a mistake. I want a divorce. A divorce. In 1884, such a word held the explosive power of scandal that could level not just reputations but legacies. The staff later reported hearing raised voices well into the night, followed by the slamming of doors and Isabella's hurried footsteps ascending the marble stairs. Theodore did not sleep, and when he emerged the next morning, his face was a hollowed mask. A man broken not by rage, but by disbelief. Yet, the emotional wound was only the beginning. Theodore's team of lawyers and investigators began tracing financial discrepancies. What they uncovered was staggering. In just 4 months, Isabella had funneled nearly $50,000 to Jonathan Pembroke, a sum that adjusted for today would exceed $1 million. But that wasn't all. The art, the jewelry. A diamond necklace that had belonged to Theodore's mother gone, sold at a fraction of its worth. What once seemed like tasteful updates to the estate now looked like a desperate liquidation. The trail led further into the dust and smoke of Pittsburgh, where Pembroke had lived several years prior. Their investigators found another story, the wife of a steel magnate who had quietly disappeared to Europe after rumors of companion and missing funds emerged. Then Richmond, a tobacco widow. The same pattern. Gifts, passion, and a vanishing act. The final report painted Jonathan Pembroke not as an architect, but as an engineer of hearts, a practiced manipulator who built his wealth from the ruin of others. When Theodore placed this damning dossier in front of Isabella, he expected tears, but she didn't weep. Instead, she defended him. She insisted that his past was different, that they were different, that what they had was real no matter what those reports said. Her voice, they say, trembled with fury, not at Pembroke, but at Theodore for daring to doubt it. That moment, more than any affair or betrayal, told Theodore the truth. His wife had fallen so deeply into Pembroke's illusion that reality could no longer reach her. By the end of November, Isabella Fairmont's position in Newport society had crumbled entirely, not because she was a woman who loved wrongly, but because she had refused to apologize for it. What began as gossip over champagne had become a headline in the New York Herald. Within days, it was everywhere. Chicago, Charleston, San Francisco, even Paris. The story had all the ingredients. The public adored a beautiful woman, obscene wealth betrayal, forbidden love, and above all, a spectacular fall from grace. One week, Isabella Fairmont was an icon of American aristocracy. The next, she was its cautionary tale, And now, the eyes of a nation were watching. Theodore Fairmont understood this better than anyone. The time for quiet resolutions and hushed apologies had passed. What was needed now was containment. His ultimatum was simple, cruel in its clarity. Isabella was to publicly renounce Jonathan Pembroke. She was to vanish from society for 1 full year, retreating into obscurity with strict limitations on her movements, finances, and freedom. In return, he would spare her the public shame of divorce, and over time he would attempt to rebuild their image through a carefully calculated campaign of charity rehabilitation and social rebranding. Isabella responded by vanishing. For 3 days, she disappeared without a trace. Newport panicked. Rumors flew. Had she run away with Pembroke? Was she on a steamship bound for Europe? Was she dead? She was found on November 15th, quietly renting a modest room in Providence under an assumed name. No servants, no luxury, no husband. Just Isabella alone and planning. When Theodore and his legal advisors confronted her, she surprised them with something none of them expected: a proposition, not for reconciliation, not for forgiveness, for war. She claimed she possessed knowledge proof of a network of corruption woven deep into the fabric of Newport's elite. Hidden chambers, secret vaults, concealed passageways built into the very homes of the city's ruling class. And what lay behind those doors? Evidence. According to Isabella, during their pillow talk and whispered walks, Pembroke had revealed much more than architectural insight. He had told her about clients, powerful, respectable men who commissioned him to design hidden spaces for secrets better left buried. She claimed she had documents, names, schematics, and worst of all, intent. She alleged that Senator William Blackstone had stashed records of bribery payments behind a false panel in his library fireplace. That railroad mogul Charles Pianton had used a secret vault beneath his wine cellar to hide forged documents related to illegal land seizures. That 3 of Newport's most established families had worked together to rig steel prices during key government contract negotiations. Theodore's lawyers were skeptical, but they were also terrified, because in the interlocked world of Gilded Age industry, one scandal rarely stood alone. A single thread pulled from the tapestry could unravel everything. Even if Isabella was exaggerating or bluffing, the accusation alone could be catastrophic. So, on November 20th, 1884, a meeting was held in the private dining room of the Belmont Hotel. No press, no records, no outside witnesses. Present were representatives of 5 of Newport's most powerful dynasties. Men who controlled railroads, steelworks, shipping lines. And now, perhaps Isabella's fate. She entered calmly. Not defiant, not desperate, but precise. Her demands were straightforward: $100,000 in cash, immediate settlement of Jonathan Pembroke's outstanding debts, safe, unobstructed passage for both of them to Europe, and a promise once gone, she would stay gone forever. In exchange, she would burn every letter, every blueprint, every whisper of evidence she claimed to hold. She would disappear from American society, take the truth with her, and never speak of Newport again. The negotiation lasted 6 tense hours, and then an agreement. But not her agreement. The families countered. They would provide the money and clear Pembroke's debts. But Isabella and Pembroke would leave on separate ships, they would live separately for a minimum of 2 years. They would sign legally binding documents swearing never to contact one another, never to return to the United States, and never to engage again with anyone from Newport's social class. No letters, no visits, no reunions, just silence. It was exile, but not for one person, for 2 lovers. When Isabella accepted the terms, witnesses noted that something in her had shifted. Gone was the fiery woman who'd once dared to defy an entire society for the sake of passion. In her place was someone quieter, more distant, as if already halfway across the ocean. When one of the lawyers asked her if she fully understood the permanence of what she was agreeing to, she simply smiled. Aren't all sacrifices worth it when they're for love? Thank you for coming back to Sleepy History Tales. Those of you who have been with the channel all this time, we send you our silent gratitude. But if you're listening to this and have not yet clicked the subscribe button perhaps, it is time for the channel and you to officially become soulmates. Because there are many more strange, sad and charming stories like the last trace of perfume left on the collar of history, waiting for you in the next episodes. The last chapter of a woman who didn't want to be saved. The money was transferred to Isabella Fairmont's hotel on November 25th, 1884. It was an absurd amount for a farewell, $100,000 to leave American society and disappear from the memory of those who once envied her glamorous life. She was scheduled to leave New York on December 2nd on the steamship Britannica, bound for Europe. Pembroke the lover, the secret. The reason for it all had left 3 days earlier. It all seemed set for a perfect ending. The most expensive love story in the history of the American upper class. But Isabella Fairmont would never set foot on Britannica, and her last 7 days would haunt Newport until the end of the century. Isabella's last week in America was spent with a suspicious calm, a calm that could only come from careful preparation or from desperation. She left her boarding house in Providence and returned to Newport, this time under her maiden name, as if to erase a history that had brought her both glory and disgrace. She took a luxurious suite at the Belmont Hotel, where the staff remembered her as a quiet but elegant woman. No visitors, no conversation, only eating in her room and writing many letters. William Chen, a young receptionist from California, remembered sending more than a dozen letters but couldn't remember the recipients' names. On November 28th, Isabella made a strange request. She hired a photographer to take her official portrait. Marcus Steinberg, who had just opened a photography studio catering to the aristocracy, later recalled that it was the strangest shoot of his life. Isabella posed for nearly 2 hours. She changed her pose, her lighting, and requested that all the prints be processed immediately. She waited in the studio, silent, thoughtful. Her beauty was intact, but there was something uneasy in her eyes, a long, calculated letting go. She kept adjusting her ruby brooch, saying it was a relic of her late grandmother. When Marcus suggested another session when she returned from Europe, Isabella simply smiled and said, "I don't think that will be necessary." Those photographs, recovered decades later when Steinberg's estate was liquidated, showed an elegant woman in formal poses, but her gaze seemed to wander beyond the lens, as if conversing with some invisible spirit behind the photographer. On December 1st, Isabella behaved even more strangely. She hired a carriage and spent the day driving around Newport, not to shop or sightsee, but to say goodbye. The coachman, Thomas McGillicuddy, said she stopped by the old casino where lavish balls had been held. She paused for a long time in front of Trinity Church where she had been married. And then the cliff walk, where she had walked with foreign guests and whispered social stories. Isabella stood for long moments at each place as if trying to carve each image into a final memory. That evening, she returned to the Belmont Hotel. She asked for dinner to be brought to her room, later than usual. The night manager, Robert Sterling, delivered it. He said that Isabella had changed out of her usual dress for a dark blue silk evening gown which shimmered in the lamplight, like a pool at night. Her jewelry, the same ruby brooch, sparkled like a farewell embroidered with precious stones. She thanked him formally, handing him a generous tip that surprised him. When he declined, Isabella simply smiled and said, "Generosity is one of the few privileges that money can buy, and I intend to use it while I can." Sleepy History Tales has more mysteries to tell. If you're listening, please leave a comment. What did you think of Isabella Fairmont's last week? Was it a quiet epic or the beginning of a deeper conspiracy? And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, because the channel will be back with mysteries as beautiful as a fairy tale, but as dark as a December rain. Newport, the last misty night. The last time Isabella Fairmont was seen alive was around 11:30 p.m. on December 1st, 1889. The hotel's night porter, a young man named William Chen, who had moved from the California goldfields, saw her descend the main staircase in a dark traveling coat carrying a small leather suitcase. She walked slowly, but surely nodding to him as she crossed the lobby. When Chen asked if she needed a carriage, Isabella smiled and shook her head. "I've already arranged everything." Chen watched her figure through the glass door, stepping into the thick white fog that was pouring in from Newport Harbor. In a matter of seconds, Isabella disappeared completely into the fog as if swallowed by the night. No one expected that this would be the last time anyone would see Isabella Fairmont alive. The next morning, when she failed to show up to board the Britannica for Europe as scheduled, her ex-husband, Theodore Fairmont, called the police. The investigation that followed was more than a search for a missing person. It was the beginning of a twisted maze of secrets, lies, and unanswered questions that would last for decades. Newport's strangest case. The Newport Police Department had never dealt with a missing person case like this. In 1889, the investigation was in its infancy. It relied on eyewitness testimony, physical evidence, and the observational skills detectives honed over the years. But Isabella Fairmont's case required more than that, both persistence and keen intuition. Chief Detective Samuel Harrison, who had worked on dockside crimes and domestic violence cases, approached the case with remarkable care. He and his team began to reconstruct Isabella's final days. They interviewed the hotel staff, the coachman, the salesman, anyone who might have seen her that final week. All painted a picture of a woman who was saying goodbye to her own life, as if she were closing a chapter with the quietness of someone who knows when to stop. The blurry footprints in room 203, Isabella's room at the Belmont Hotel, appeared to have been meticulously cleaned. All the furniture was neatly arranged, not a hasty escape, but someone preparing for something final. But what interested the investigators was not what was left, but what was missing. Valuable jewelry, including a diamond necklace she had worn, was gone. Unfinished manuscripts of letters handwritten to relatives were scattered across the desk. The finished ones were nowhere to be found. But the strangest thing was a piece of a document that had burned in the fireplace. What remained were a few lines of financial calculations and a few names, JP, which appeared to be Jonathan Pembroke, and WB, which initially puzzled investigators until they remembered it could be William Blackstone, the senator who had been rumored to have had an illicit relationship with Isabella. Jonathan Pembroke, lover or illusion? The case took a turn when Detective Harrison tried to contact Jonathan Pembroke in London. But the address Isabella's lawyer had obtained was just a post office. Pembroke seemed to have evaporated from the face of the earth. No London hotel had his name on it. No boarding house, no passport, no letters from England. A check of the ship's records revealed that someone had booked a ship to London under the name Jonathan Pembroke, but never boarded. Harrison began to suspect, could Pembroke be a false identity? Or did he never leave America? The deeper we dig into the background of the romantic architect, the more dark things appear. Pembroke was a real person in Pittsburgh and Richmond, but left abruptly, leaving behind unfinished projects and a series of unpaid debts. In each city he visited, there were traces of love affairs with wealthy women. And then he disappeared. The man in the dark. There is no doubt Pembroke was more than just a lover. He was a con artist, an engineer of the heart, and Isabella Fairmont may have been just a pawn in his grand game. But how did that game end? We will continue this mysterious story in the next part. But before you leave, don't forget to leave a comment sharing your thoughts. What happened to Isabella? Was Pembroke involved? Or is there another force lurking in the Newport mists? You're listening to Sleepy History Tales, where the ghosts of history never sleep. Sleepy History Tales, Isabella Fairmont, Part 5. Disappearing in the Mist. The last confirmed sighting of Isabella Fairmont occurred around 11:30 p.m. on December 1st, 1889. Hotel night clerk William Chen would later recall her figure descending the grand staircase of the Newport Regency Hotel. Graceful, poised, yet unmistakably resolute. She wore a dark traveling coat and held a small leather valise in her hand. Her steps were steady, not rushed. She nodded politely to Chen as she passed, declining his offer for transportation assistance with a calm, practiced tone. My arrangements have already been made. Through the large front windows of the hotel, Chen watched as Isabella stepped into the night. A dense fog, cold and coastal, had rolled in from the harbor. Within seconds, her silhouette vanished into the mist, swallowed by the grey veil that often blanketed Newport in the winter. It was the last time anyone would see her alive. When Isabella failed to board the Britannica steamship the next morning, panic set in. Her cousin, Theodore Fairmont, alerted the authorities. What followed was not merely a missing persons investigation, it was the beginning of a decades-long descent into secret lies and whispered betrayals. The Newport Police Department had never encountered a case like Isabella's. In 1889, investigations still relied heavily on testimony, physical artifacts, and the slowly emerging field of professional detective work. Leading the effort was Chief Detective Samuel Harrison, a no-nonsense officer known for his precision and persistence. Trained in solving crimes among dock workers and domestic quarrels, Harrison now found himself unraveling a tale that was anything but ordinary. His first step: retrace Isabella's movements in her final days. Harrison and his team interviewed hotel staff, cab drivers, local merchants, anyone who might have crossed paths with her. A picture emerged. Isabella had been methodically tying up loose ends, settling accounts, and bidding quiet goodbyes. It was as though she were preparing for a journey she knew she would never return from. Back in her hotel suite, Harrison discovered her belongings were immaculately arranged, neither abandoned in haste nor packed for travel. Some items were conspicuously missing, including several expensive pieces of jewelry, like a diamond bracelet she'd been seen wearing earlier in the week. More troubling were the papers found in the fireplace, partly burned, partly preserved. What remained showed numbers, financial calculations, and names. JP almost certainly referred to Jonathan Pembroke. But WB investigators soon suspected it meant William Blackstone, the powerful Senator Isabella had once vowed to expose. As Harrison sought Pembroke for questioning, things turned darker. The London address given to Isabella's legal team led to a mail forwarding service. Pembroke himself had vanished, just like Isabella. British authorities confirmed he'd never checked into any London hotels. And though a man with his name had booked passage across the Atlantic ship, records confirmed he never boarded. Digging deeper, Harrison uncovered disturbing inconsistencies. Though Pembroke's resume boasted architectural accomplishments in Pittsburgh and Richmond, both projects had been abandoned midway, along with unpaid bills and broken engagements. Even more troubling was a pattern in every city. Pembroke had formed relationships with affluent women and disappeared shortly after. But the true horror was yet to come. Working with local building inspectors, Harrison's team began examining the mansions Pembroke had modified. In at least 3 homes, they uncovered secret compartments and hidden corridors, just like the ones Isabella had described in her journals. And these weren't installed after their affair became public. No. The blueprints dated back months earlier, implying one thing: Pembroke's courtship of Isabella may have been part of a much larger plan. Then came a knock on Harrison's office door, a visitor no one expected. Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, an aging seamstress known for her work in Newport's wealthier households, requested a private audience. She had information, she said, about Isabella's disappearance, but she would only speak in strict confidence. Her name, she insisted, must not be connected to what she was about to reveal. According to her, on the very night Isabella vanished, December 1st, Mrs. Winthrop had been working late in the Peaton Mansion's sewing room when she heard voices outside. Looking out through a narrow rear window, she saw Isabella speaking with 2 men in the courtyard. The exchange appeared tense. Isabella gestured frequently while the men remained motionless, like statues. Then one of them handed her what appeared to be a parcel, and the 3 disappeared into a closed carriage. Winthrop couldn't describe the men in detail: the fog, the distance, the shadows. But then she mentioned something so precise. Harrison froze. Isabella had worn a ruby brooch that night, and Winthrop described exactly how it had caught the moonlight. It was a detail no newspaper had printed. No rumor had spread. Only someone who had been there could have known. Just when we think we've uncovered every secret, the shadows seem to multiply. If this story is drawing you deeper into the fog of history, please give it a like. It helps others find us. And if you haven't subscribed to Sleepy History Tales, now is the perfect time. Every week we journey through long-forgotten chapters of human mystery. Many of you watch quietly, and we thank you. But if you're still lurking in the mists without subscribing, why not step into the light? We'd love to hear your thoughts, your theories, and your curiosity in the comments. Now, let's return to Isabella. The breakthrough came not from shadowy courtyards or dusty journals, but from cold, hard numbers. Financial records tied to the 5 families who had orchestrated Isabella's quiet exile revealed something far more sinister. The $100 and $1,000 they'd pledged to fund her departure had been deposited into a New York bank account. The name on the account, I.C. Aldrich Isabella's maiden initials, but that account had never been touched. Even more troubling, the documents used to open it had been forged. And the handwriting, not Isabella's. It was now unmistakable to Harrison. Someone had impersonated Isabella to claim her money, only for some reason they never did. Either the imposter failed, or they never intended to collect. A chilling silence crept into the investigation. But the most haunting revelation of all came when Harrison's team began scrutinizing the architectural alterations that Pembroke had secretly commissioned in several Newport mansions. Collaborating with local inspectors, they unearthed a chilling truth. At least 3 estates concealed precisely the kind of hidden rooms and secret corridors Isabella had once whispered about. The discovery was damning not merely for what it proved, but when it had been done. These alterations weren't recent. They had been completed months before Isabella's affair with Pembroke ever surfaced. This meant that what had once seemed like a reckless romance might in fact have been something far more calculated and far more sinister. The direction of the investigation veered once again when an unexpected figure appeared at Harrison's door. Mrs. Margaret Winthrop, an elderly seamstress with weathered hands and watchful eyes, had spent decades stitching in silence for Newport's elite. Now she claimed to carry a truth long buried in fabric and fear. But there was a condition: absolute secrecy. No names revealed, no public record, only shadows. What Mrs. Winthrop revealed was as unnerving as it was enigmatic. She told of a night, December 1st, when she had been working late in the sewing quarters of the Peaton mansion. A light still burned in the main house, unusual at that hour. Drawn by instinct or dread, she crept toward a small upstairs window overlooking the courtyard. There, under the flickering gas lamps and cold moonlight, she saw Isabella Fairmont in heated conversation with 2 unfamiliar men. Isabella's arms moved with urgency, pointing pleading perhaps, while the men stood eerily still. After about 20 minutes, one of the men handed Isabella what looked like a package or perhaps a thick envelope. Then, with no fanfare or farewell, all 3 disappeared into a closed carriage that rattled off into the night. Mrs. Winthrop's story was compelling but problematic. She could offer no clear description of the men. The lighting, she said, was poor, her angle imperfect. And unfortunately, her reputation in Newport was less than pristine. Dismissed from past jobs for gossip, Margaret Winthrop was a woman too often accused of spinning stories alongside thread. Detective Harrison almost dismissed her, until she mentioned one chilling detail: the ruby brooch. The same one hotel staff had earlier noted a brooch that caught the moonlight in a way that could only be recognized by someone who had actually seen it. Her testimony, once shaky, now held the weight of something real and terrifying. Just when we think Newport has revealed all its horrors, it tightens its grip once more. And hey, if your spine tingled just now, maybe it's time to share that sensation. Send this video to a friend who devours dark history by candlelight. And if you've been watching in quiet curiosity all this time, consider subscribing. Here at Sleepy History Tales, there are many who walk with us in silence. But you, yes, you can light the lantern for others by tapping that subscribe button or simply dropping your thoughts in a comment. We see you, and we're grateful. Now, back to Isabella. The breakthrough came not in a haunted mansion or a witness's whisper, but in the cold, clean pages of financial records. Harrison, now joined by a federal investigator specializing in financial deception, began examining the monetary trail left by the 5 Newport families who had orchestrated Isabella's exile. The supposed $100,000 payment intended to fund her departure to Europe had been wired to a New York bank account under the name I.C. Aldrich. Isabella's maiden name, her initials, at first glance it seemed legit. But the deeper they dug, the more disturbing it became. The account had never been touched. Not a single withdrawal, not a single transaction. Even more chilling, someone had opened the account using forged identification, and the handwriting on the banking forms didn't match Isabella's distinct, elegant script. The implication was devastating. She had never received the money. She had never boarded any ship. And perhaps, just perhaps, she had never even left Newport. The illusion of her disappearance was beginning to fracture. And what lay beneath that illusion was far darker than anyone could have imagined. Evidence began vanishing from police custody, not by coincidence, but under a cloud of suspicion, so thick it choked even the most seasoned investigators. The files belonging to Pinkerton detective A.Y., the same ones that had once illuminated the shadowy corners of Isabella Fairmont's case, were devoured by a fire that mysteriously erupted in the Boston office. A fire with no identified cause, no arrests, just smoke ash and silence. What began as a vigorous federal investigation soon sank into a quicksand of bureaucratic entanglements. Disputes broke out over jurisdiction, local, state, federal, all conveniently timed to stall the process. Key investigators were quietly reassigned. Legal battles erupted over technicalities in search warrants, arrest procedures, chain of custody. Months passed, then a year. By the summer of 1890, one fact had become heartbreakingly clear. There were powers at play far beyond the reach of the Newport Police Department. The wealthy families Isabella had sought to expose had tendrils reaching into every level of government and law enforcement. They weren't merely wealthy, they were untouchable. Then came the final betrayal. Theodore Fairmont, Isabella's grieving widower, publicly withdrew from the investigation. Through a carefully worded statement by his attorneys, he claimed that he wished only to let his late wife rest in peace, far from the glare of public sensationalism. But behind this noble-sounding sentiment lay something far more cynical. Investigators, through a trail of financial records, would later piece together the real story. Theodore had received significant government contracts for his steel business. In return, he pledged to halt his cooperation and to publicly support a narrative that painted Isabella's death as a suicide caused allegedly by depression and exile. It was a lie. A well-compensated, officially sanctioned lie. With Theodore's silence purchased, the criminal cases unraveled. Charles Peyton was acquitted due to lack of evidence. William Blackstone's charges were dismissed on a technicality. The Pinkerton agents who had been complicit, gone presumably relocated, renamed and rewarded for their obedience. On October 15, 1890, Isabella Fairmont was buried in the family plot at Newport's Island Cemetery. Fewer than 20 mourners stood beneath the grey sky. No newspaper printed an obituary. No society column whispered a word of farewell. But you see, stories like Isabella's do not die with the coffin lid. Not truly. In the years that followed, something uncanny stirred a different kind of justice. It didn't come from courtrooms or police files. It came from within. From the haunted minds and decaying empires of the very people who thought they had erased her. Charles Pemberton, the man whose basement had become Isabella's tomb, spiraled into madness. Family members described him as paranoid, tormented, utterly alone. He swore Isabella's ghost walked the halls of his mansion, whispering through keyholes, staring from mirrors. He fled to New York. It didn't help. Meanwhile, his company Peon Steel began to collapse. The very corruption Isabella had uncovered, fraudulent contracts, price rigging, was discovered anew not by Newport detectives but by federal auditors with no ties to the murder. By 1895, Peon Steel was crumbling under bankruptcy and criminal charges, and Isabella Fairmont in death began to win. The secrets Isabella had once threatened to drag into the light were in the end unearthed, not by crusading investigators, but by the cold, methodical hand of asset seizure. Tucked away in forgotten safes and hidden compartments, her evidence was finally revealed during the disintegration of the Peton Empire. Every accusation she had made was proven true. Every thread she'd begun to unravel had in fact been part of a much larger web. In 1897, Charles Peyton was found lifeless in his Manhattan mansion. Though the official cause was listed as heart failure, the grim details suggested otherwise. The man whose home had witnessed Isabella's final moments died in haunted silence, some say by his own hand, unable to escape the weight of a ghost that never left. Senator William Blackstone's fall from grace followed a different path, but the destination was the same. In 1892, during a federal probe into political corruption, wholly unrelated to the Fairmont case, agents discovered damning documents concealed behind the ornate fireplace of his personal library, just as Isabella had claimed. The papers outlined a brazen scheme to auction off Senate influence over railroad legislation. Expelled from Congress in disgrace, Blackstone died impoverished in 1899, his family fortune bled dry by court battles and restitution orders. The same dark fate awaited every one of Isabella's persecutors. Thomas Hartwell, once a titan of the railroad industry, was ruined when the Interstate Commerce Commission exposed the very price-fixing network Isabella had warned of. His suicide in 1896 splashed across national headlines, leaving behind a legacy of shattered trust. Robert Sterling, heir to a vast banking fortune, watched his empire crumble during the Panic of 1893. The reckless lending practices Isabella had uncovered left his institution fatally exposed when the economy turned. He never recovered financially or personally, but it was the Pinkerton Detective Agency, the hand that had wielded the knife on behalf of the powerful, that met the most ironic end. As labor unrest surged in the 1890s, the agency found itself under increasing federal scrutiny. Congressional hearings pulled back the curtain on their shadowy methods, illegal surveillance, violent suppression. corporate collusion. The empire that had once operated above the law fell apart under the weight of its own sins. By 1900, the Pinkertons were disgraced, their biggest clients gone, and indictments looming in multiple states. Among those who never forgot Isabella was Detective Samuel Harrison, the original investigator from the Newport police. Though he retired in 1905, the case remained his quiet obsession. He spent the remainder of his life piecing together the threads no one else dared follow. After his death in 1918, his personal files were discovered in a locked chest. They included not only the full scope of Isabella's murder, but compelling evidence that other unexplained deaths in Newport during the Gilded Age were connected to the same powerful network. Poisonings, disappearances, cover-ups. A quiet slaughter orchestrated from gilded parlors. His final report, dated 1917, read like a deathbed confession. The murder of Mrs. Isabella Fairmont was not an aberration. It was part of a coordinated effort by this nation's elite to silence dissent, bury truth, and preserve power through fear. The justice system, when confronted with wealth and influence, folded. And that failure will echo through time. And echo it did. In hushed drawing rooms and behind gloved hands, Isabella's name became a cautionary tale. But society learned the wrong lesson. Mothers warned their daughters to avoid scandal. Fathers cautioned against ambition. No one dared say what Isabella's death truly meant, that the powerful, when threatened, will kill without hesitation. The Peaton Mansion, once the scene of her final hours, stood empty for 2 decades. Locals whispered of strange happenings, flickering lights behind boarded windows, the faint sound of music drifting across snow-covered lawns, and the lingering scent of French perfume in sealed rooms. No one stayed long. In 1920, the mansion was purchased by a Catholic charity and reopened as an orphanage. But the ghosts did not leave. The scent of expensive French perfume, the soft sound of a woman weeping when no one is there, and always, that uncanny feeling of being watched by eyes that no longer belong to the living. After decades of eerie reports, the hotel's management made a strange decision. They removed the number from the door of Isabella Fairmont's final room and repurposed the space as storage. But the whispers never stopped. In 1979, historian Dr. Margaret Steinberg, after spending 2 decades immersed in dusty records, private correspondences, and local ghost stories, published The Newport Murders: Wealth, Power, and Justice in Gilded Age America. The book sent shockwaves through the academic world and the general public alike. In it, Dr. Steinberg argued that Isabella Fairmont hadn't been the victim of passion or madness, but of capitalism, corruption, and conspiracy. Her murder, she wrote, wasn't personal. It was strategic. A cold calculation by powerful men who saw human life as expendable, just another asset to be liquidated when inconvenient. The book's popularity reignited national interest in the Fairmont case. It became a staple among true crime enthusiasts, historians, and skeptics who all searched for missing threads in the grand tapestry of this century-old mystery. In 2019, over 130 years after Isabella's death, the FBI's Cold Case Division announced that it had reopened the investigation using modern forensic technology. They didn't promise arrests. Too much time had passed. Too many records had been lost, or more likely intentionally destroyed. But the point wasn't punishment anymore. For many, justice now meant truth. Truth without permission. Isabella's death became more than a murder mystery. It became a symbol of what happens when someone dares to challenge the machinery of wealth and privilege. She wasn't just a victim, she was a warning, and perhaps also a martyr. Her final moments still haunt the halls of Newport, both metaphorically and some would say literally. As long as the old mansions stand and the shadows of the past stretch across their marble floors, the question remains, did we truly uncover every secret? Or are there still whispers trapped in the walls, waiting for someone brave enough to listen? Sleepy History Tales. Thanks you for keeping Isabella's memory alive by listening, by wondering, and by caring. Every like, comment, and share helps us ensure that voices like hers are never silenced again. To those who have subscribed, thank you for being part of this growing community of curious minds. But many still walk beside us in silence. If you've enjoyed this journey into the haunting world of America's hidden past, consider joining us fully by subscribing. Tap the bell so you'll know when the next forgotten truth rises to the surface. Now tell us, what do you think happened that night in Newport? Was justice ever truly served, or does Isabella still wait somewhere in the fog between history and legend? Leave a comment. Share your theory. And remember, some truths refuse to stay buried. Until next time, from all of us at Sleepy History Tales, sleep with one eye on the past.